Brisket on a Hasty Bake. Let's get rolling. I got with me today a 14-pound packer brisket. These things are not cheap these days. We haven't done one in a while because they're so expensive, but I can't hold off any longer. You guys just keep asking for it. You want to know how to make these things on a Hasty Bake. I want to show you how easy it is, how that convection cooking on the Hasty Bake is going to put the perfect bark on this thing, the perfect amount of moisture. We got some fun ingredients we're going to be using. Let's roll. I like to trim my briskets when they're a little bit colder. Not freezer cold, but cold enough that that fat is still firm enough for me to be able to pull it off in good slices. But at the same time, I wanted to slack out a little bit. So I pulled this out of the fridge about 25 minutes ago. Still cold, still chilled. But right now we're gonna open this sucker up. This is a USDA prime brisket. Let's talk a little bit about what you're looking for when you're selecting a brisket. One, I want the thickest flat right here that I could possibly get. So this is your point, this is your flat. I really want a real thick flat. And the reason being is because this is the part that's gonna wanna dry out on you the quickest. If this is real paper thin, it's not gonna work for you, it's gonna dry out, you're gonna cut it off, throw it off the grill, it's not gonna be worth it. Also, when you flip this thing over, you wanna feel around for that hard fat. If it's got a massive cap of hard fat on it, you don't want it. You're gonna have to remove it, you're gonna be paying for weight that you're throwing away. I also wanna make sure that brisket is fairly bendy. The bendier it is, the more that fat is distributed rather than kind of strained out in big long pockets. It's gonna make it a lot easier to cook, it's gonna cook a lot more evenly, you're gonna have a lot higher yield. First thing I'm gonna do is come over here to this flat. This side right here is really good. This side starts to taper down. I want to find out where that taper is, which is right about here, and I'm actually just going to sacrifice this. I know at the end product, this is not going to be a good piece of meat anyway, so I don't want to waste my time building bark and trying to render fat out of it. Again, I'm going to find right where it starts tapering down. In my mind, that's right about there, and I'm just going to go ahead and sacrifice this real thin part of the flat. The other thing I want to do when I'm focusing on trimming a brisket is, one, you want to remove any hard fat that you can possibly remove from the top, because that hard fat is not going to render. You want to take off all the hard fat you possibly can, and any real intense fat buildup, so something over a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch, you want to go ahead and get rid of. Luckily, this brisket is not that bad. I do have some hard fat right here that I'm going to go ahead and trim off. A lot of people are intimidated when they trim brisket, and they're intimidated because when they go online and follow trimming videos, the people who normally do those trimming videos are the guys who are really, really good at it. And one, that means they're super fast and they're super intricate. Or two, that means they're competition cookers and they're over trimming the brisket. Now, trimming a brisket really heavy in competition is a great thing, and it's a really good practice to get into in competition. But in the backyard, you do not need to go to the extent that these competition trimmers do when they go to clean up their brisket. See, I'm already exposing the meat on that side, and this also lets me know how thick this fat cap is right there. Because a brisket is made up of two muscles, the point and the flat, but the flat side right here has a leaner part of fat. It doesn't have the same amount of fat that the point has in it, so it's going to cook a lot leaner. Right here in the flat, we actually want to keep as much of this fat on as we can because it's going to keep that piece moist. It's going to keep it from drying out. But on the point side here, all this fat that's on top is actually going to end up making, when we do burn ends or slices, just a big glob of fat. So I trim quite a bit of fat off the point side and leave the majority of the fat on the flat side. You can trim to your heart's content. You can spend an hour on this, you can spend 5 minutes on it. It just depends on the end product that you're hoping for. Let us know in the comments if you're a point or you're a flat person. It's always interesting for me to see what people lean toward. Personally, I'm a moist point guy. I know a lot of people that like that flat though. So tell us in the comments below what you prefer. Here's some hard fat down here. This hard fat right here is going to come off. Again, it is not going to render during the cook. All these little edges right here, this is where you start to kind of make it more aerodynamic. If you think about it, when this thing's in the grill, you want your smoke to kind of lay and roll over it. If you got big old pieces that are sticking up, catching smoke, those pieces are going to get hit with more heat, more smoke, they're going to char, they're going to turn into beef jerky. So the smoother you can make this brisket, the more consistent the bark is going to be. So I got most of the fat removed from my point here, and that's good. I'm leaving most of the fat on my flat side. I've made a couple little cuts over here. You can kind of see it's really just not that thick, which is beautiful, because I want to leave it on there if I possibly can. Now, you can kind of see the aerodynamic side of this is starting to fail right on in here. It's going to get caught up, and that heat and smoke is going to turn that into beef jerky, so I'm coming along with my knife. Some people take this whole fat glob out right here. You definitely can, but I find that when I do that, the point wants to collapse. If you seam that fat all the way out, which again you can, it's going to go about halfway into that brisket, and that seam that's right here, that becomes that seam that's right there. It's all one piece, because remember, these are two pieces of muscle sitting on top of each other. That's the fat seam in between them. Today, we're gonna be putting a binder on it. We're also gonna be hitting it with some good old cattle call beef and all seasoning. It's a favorite around here. You can get it at hastybake.com. A little bit of olive oil on there just to moisten that surface. When we come back with a shaker, remember, it's a big piece of meat. It can take quite a bit of seasoning. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they're cooking in general, but especially cooking barbecue and they're getting started, is they don't season enough. Seasoning is everything. The meat tastes great. We want to taste the meat. But if you're using the right seasoning that's going to bring out the flavors of the meat, it's not bad to season that thing heavy. Now, there's a big debate. Fat side up, fat side down. 100% up to you. You figure out what works for you. When I'm cooking on a Hasty Bake personally, I always go fat side down because my heat is coming from the bottom on that Hasty Bake. Remember, it's a convection cooker, so it heats on the bottom. I let that fat cap be the thing that protects my meat. Our Hasty Bake today, you're gonna see we're set up right here. This is the exact smoking setup that I always do when I'm cooking brisket. I start out with a small layer of charcoal, and from there I add some wood, disperse it out, make sure you pack that charcoal nice and tight. If it's loose and all that air can get through, that fire can run away on you. So pack your charcoal real tight, top it off with a little bit of wood, come back with some more charcoal, build that mountain of charcoal around it, top it off with a little bit more wood. If this brisket was bigger, say an 18 or 20 pounder, I'd probably put some competition logs or briquettes on top just to make it super dense. Once I get in there, go ahead and put that heat shield on it. I'm lighting this thing up. I want this thing to be humming around 250 to 275 today. It's hot out, so you got about another 20 or 25 degrees. It's just coming from the sun that's gonna be hitting that grill. So 250 to 275 today. We are in the smoke position. We're gonna let this thing roll. Got to use my handy dandy bushel right here. Guys, can I tell you something about this bushel that I just love? That is handcrafted in the United States. He's not paying me to tell you this. I've just been using this thing for years and I love it. This is like 2 pounds of solid stainless steel with a sharpened edge so it can get underneath your meat. It's got a nice big long hardwood handle on it, and he engraves stuff on it if you want him to engrave. I want to tell you right now, you guys need to go look up barbecue bushela online. There's some brands out there that have taken this American made product and they've knocked it off and they made it in China and they sell it for cheaper. And I'm telling you right now, you want the original, you want something American made, you want to support a small business. We love this guy, we just want to support him, and I love these things right here. It makes moving around big meat on a grill so much easier. So when you're carrying that thing around, go ahead and pop that underneath. It's a spatula for your meat. Let's talk basting a little bit, all right? So I always like to baste my briskets. Some people don't think you need to. I always like to baste them for a couple different reasons. When you create moisture on that meat, whether you're adding it or you put a water pan or something inside that grill, that moist meat gets smoke and flame to stick to it. You want that smoke to stick to it because that's where you get your flavor. It also builds a beautiful bark. If that surface dries out, it's gonna start to crack and break, and you're gonna end up with a dried out piece of meat. But when you can keep that surface moist, and all of that juice is coming out of that mixture of fat and the moisture creates a beautiful bark on top. So I like to keep it moist. In order to do that, I like to use something like this. So this right here is a basting bottle. You can pump this sprayer, spray it down, it gives a nice even coat of meat. You can use a regular spray bottle if that's all you got at home. We got these awesome spray bottles that I absolutely love. I'm gonna be basting with a couple things. Apple cider vinegar, some good old American whiskey. So this right here, Treaty Oak Ghost Hill Texas Bourbon. Thank you, Al Fragoni and the Treaty Oak folks for getting this over to me. I love this stuff and I really like to use it when I'm cooking. So I'm gonna be putting this in my spray bottle with some apple cider vinegar. We're gonna have ourselves a bourbon brisket when we're all done. I mean, it's not too early, right? Cheers, folks. And this brisket's been on for about 6.5 hours. Been monitoring the temperature with my meter probe. It's about 175 degrees internal, but more important to me than the internal temperature of that brisket right now is what the bark looks like. So we want to make sure that the color of that brisket is exactly what we want it to be when we're going to slice it, because it's not going to pick any more of that color up right now. We're going to go grab that brisket off the grill. I want to show it to you. Our edges are looking real good. It's got a nice dark mahogany color, like I said, almost leaning toward black. It's got a good bark. I've been basting it with that Treaty Oak whiskey with some apple cider vinegar, a little bit of water mixed in there, but doing that about every 30 or 45 minutes. Now this is where that temperature thing is not always the way to go, because I'm probing it right now in some of these sections of the probe, 175, 180, 190. A lot of times that means that brisket's really tendering up. When I put my thermopen in here, it's not getting tender yet. So this thing's still got some time left on it. So you always want to go by touch as well and feel how that probe works. We're gonna wrap it up. I like to use butcher paper personally. You wanna wrap it real tight, really as tight as you can possibly get it. So I like to go flat like that, go one over, it's like a wrapping a present. Let that wrap kind of conform to the brisket. And We do the roll. Keep tucking. You want it to be as tight as you can possibly be there. Jam those edges in. I'm going to go ahead and crank my temperature up to about 300 degrees. I want to push this thing through any kind of a stall it's going to be in, so we get this thing done in time. So 300 degrees, back on the Gourmet probe until this thing is probe tender. Maybe 200, maybe 205, maybe 210. We don't know. Probe tender is what we're looking for. We'll be back on the tray. It's been about 11 hours. Took about 8 hours on the grill. I've let this brisket rest for 3 hours. Take it off that cooker, throw it in the cooler, put an old towel on it, get that thing insulated so it's going to hold its heat for a nice long time. You want that thing to rest for as long as you can possibly give it. There you go. Look at that right there. That is some black gold. Beautiful brisket. Nice, jiggly, tender brisket. Got our wonderful bark form. It's nice and firm. We got wonderful color. Nice and jiggly on the board. We go right down in between. When we cut this open, you're going to be able to see the difference between those two muscles right here in the middle. You got your point and your flat right there. You got nice juice coming out of this nice juicy brisket. Get us off a slice of this, see how this thing turned out. Nice and bendy right there. It's gonna pull apart. Here's a real test. As tender as that is, as beautiful as that color is, as good as that smoke ring that we got on this thing, how does this thing taste? Fatty, smoky, delicious. I told you guys we talked about slicing this. You're gonna slice this flat right down here. And these wonderful slices right through here. All the way down, just like this, back and forth. When you get to your point, that's where you can flip this piece right here, because the grain on this point muscle changes direction. It's the exact opposite direction. So instead of slicing this point muscle all the way down like this, you can flip it and start slicing it from the edge like this. You're gonna have a little shorter slices, but it's gonna be following the grain of that point muscle. You end up with beautiful point meat right there. If you want to chop whatever side you want. A lot of people chop the point. I love to chop the flat because sometimes it ends up a little drier. You throw some sauce on there, it ends up absolutely beautiful. I like to keep that point, all that nice, fatty, moist meat. Pull all my slices out of that. It's up to you. We've had this question a million times. How do you cook a brisket on a Hasty Bake? And we just showed you right there, guys. Simple seasoning, quality brisket. And this 259 behind me held 250 to 270 for the last 9 hours. Did not break. Didn't have to touch it. Wonderful holder of charcoal. Latch that thing down. It seals up like a tank. Absolutely killer brisket cooking machine. I like to say you get the moisture of a Kamado or a barrel, but you get the smoke and the bark of a nice offset cooker all in one in that Hasty Bake. And this is the kind of brisket you can cook out of that. And alive, look at that nice, tender, fatty, beautiful brisket, wonderful bark. You can't ask for better than that. Thanks for being here, guys. Like, follow, subscribe, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the places. You know where to go. If you got yourself a Hasty Bake, this is your central to get all your good recipes. If you don't have yourself a Hasty Bake, you better start looking. It's your next cooker, and it's the last cooker you're ever going to want. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next time. Let's dig into this brisket.